So Beena, thank you for joining us today. If you can just share with our listeners who you are, what you do.
Sure. Beena Sharma, I'm the CEO and co-founder of CCU International. I'm also the co-founder of Women in New Energy and Internet Zero.
Fantastic. And then just if we go back before we get to CCU International, where did your career kick off? Where are you from?
So originally I'm from London. I was born and brought up in London. I went to school in London. I went to university just outside of London. And really that's where I started off. I think my career I actually started with a law degree and very quickly realised it wasn't for me.
Okay.
And ended up transitioning into the energy industry very, very randomly and without really much thought, to be honest.
Fantastic. And then going right back, your father passed away at an early age, came over from Bangladesh, an entrepreneur. How did that inspire you?
Yeah, so my dad, he passed away when I was 6 months old. So I was very young. My mum, I'm one of 5 siblings. And my mum was, I'm number 4, and my mum was pregnant with my younger brother. So it was quite tough growing up, as you can imagine. But my father actually came in the late 70s, late 60s, early 70s, to set up business in the UK. And actually what he thrived in was the Italian rag trade. So import-export leather. It was huge, obviously, in the 70s. So he set up several factories in the East End of London, and kind of grew his empire from there, moved his family to one of the best parts of North London. But unfortunately, he was probably an 80-a-day cigarette smoker and a workaholic, which eventually led to his heart attack. But his stories live on, obviously, through family, through his friends, and the commitment that he had to making a better life for his family is really what inspired me, and what he managed to do in such a short space of time in that East End of London.
And when your dad passed away, did your family still continue to run that business?
No, we didn't actually. So, I don't often talk about this, but it's when people do ask, I think it's really important to say it. So one of the biggest challenges that we had when we were growing up was that my dad never wrote a will.
Okay.
So after he passed away, there were lots of claims to his money from different members of the family, from other parts of the world, some of the family that were left in Bangladesh. And we probably spent the best part of 15 years toing and froing from court just to try and get some of that that belonged to us. Yeah. So it wasn't just the businesses, it was the house. My mum didn't speak any English when she came. She couldn't read or write English. And long story short, she was bringing up 5 kids on her own. She had no family support. So she pretty much got ripped off left, right and centre. The businesses were somehow taken off her hands. She had no paperwork. And it was pretty tough growing up. So although we grew up in a very affluent part of North London, we went to some of the best state schools. We actually grew up, it's weird to say, but we actually grew up in poverty. Okay. I remember growing up and saying to my mum, can we put the heating on? It's cold. And she'd say to me, well, it's either that or you eat tonight. Which one is it going to be? And then you look at the house that we lived in and you think, how on earth did that happen? My mum used to sew her own clothes. And so it, despite the fact that my dad had a lot of wealth, it didn't quite filter down to us in the way that we thought it would. And many, many years later, it was some 15 years later that we actually got right to the house that we lived in, and my mum was able to sell that and then move on.
Wow. That's an interesting...
Yeah, it's a book.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
So you eventually moved into oil and gas. You were in a LNG plant in Nigeria. So how did that come about? What was your university? Where did you go from there, and how did you end up in Nigeria?
Yeah, I grew up, if anybody remembers Cracker, it was Robbie Coltrane, criminal psychologist. I spent a lot of my time watching that and wanting to be Robbie Coltrane. So I was adamant that I would do criminal psychology. Now, I was fascinated by more the psychology part of it than I was the criminal side of it, but I was fascinated by the whole criminal psychology thing. In those days, there wasn't the opportunity to do a degree in criminal psychology. You went down the law route and then you went down the psychology route, or vice versa. So I decided to do the most boring part first, the law. Okay. Anyway, it wasn't for me, and I very quickly switched careers and moved on to social sciences and psychology. And once I left that role, naturally we were going into sort of coming up to 2001, sorry. And we were going into a period where lots of young people, obviously at the end of summer now, looking for their jobs. And everybody at that time would say, you just take what you can. So I ended up actually working for a recruitment company, recruiting into the financial markets in New York.
Wow.
And then if you remember, September the 11th happened.
Yeah.
And we watched some of our clients.
Were you based in London?
I was based in London, yes,
Yeah.
but we were recruiting into some of the companies. Our clients were Cantor Fitzgerald and all of those companies that were in those buildings. And it was a bit of a shock to the system. And then we had a massive crash. So lots of jobs started going. And a friend of mine was working for an oil and gas company at the time, and said that, would you be interested in looking at something here? So I thought, well, what on earth can I do?
Yeah, why not?
I wasn't going to be choosy, I needed a job, right? And he handed in my CV, and I ended up doing different things. And it was only a year later that they contacted me and said, we're actually quite interested in speaking to you. We're setting up a new department, which falls under our health and safety department, and we're really keen to speak to you. So I went in. The role was actually more of a administrator role. But the reason why they liked me was because I had a psychology education background.
Yeah.
And what they were looking to do was set up a behavioral safety department.
Wow.
That would end up supporting all of their sites all over the world.
Yeah.
So I went into this space. I was obviously very new to work, but also I was very new to the industry, and also very new to working in the psychology space.
Yeah.
And they wanted to build this team of trainers that would go around. If you think about the industry, we kill a lot of people in our industry. It's construction, right? And it's big oil and gas construction. And what we were finding is over the last previous 15, 20 years, gradually the number of deaths and accidents in the industry had declined. And then in the years coming up to the time that I had joined the industry, we were still consistently killing roughly the same number of people, but we were getting better at our policies, getting better at our procedures, putting more rules and regulations in. And really, we came to the conclusion that it was the behavioral part, the psychology of people choosing to do something that was unsafe or choosing not to do something that was safe, that was ultimately resulting in their accident, incident, or death. So it was up to me to educate those people on why their choices.
So compliance has become a big thing in the last few years.
Yes.
And that's obviously a reason why.
Yeah, we say that 99.9% of the accidents and incidents that happen, regardless of where they are or what industry they're in, can be avoided.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to human behavior, either doing something they shouldn't be doing or not doing something they should have been doing.
Yeah.
And we used to do things like root cause analysis, where we'd say, why? Well, why did you do that? Well, why was that? Why? And ultimately you end up at a human behavior.
Yeah. No, fantastic. And so you mentioned different industries. Did these different industries prepare you for kind of where you are now? And that's very technical. The amount of knowledge and whatever else you need to take in there. How did your past kind of prepare you for that?
I think definitely studying law did that.
Okay.
And one of the reasons why I didn't want to carry on with law was because I remember my first year exams, and I remember having to read case after case after case and learn case after case after case, the names, the dates. And I remember a student who was a few years older than me would say the best method for me learning those I would stand on a chair and I would project my voice when I'm reading out these cases. So I started doing that, and I thought, this is crazy. And I realized that actually I could retain quite a lot of information, but I found that there was zero creativity in it,
okay,
which is why I didn't want to continue it. But I also realized something about myself. I can actually retain quite a lot of information, and I can retain it better if I understand it.
Okay.
So if I simplify it. And I think that's what led me to really realize that actually I have an ability here that many people don't have. And then one of the other incidents that happened when I was at university, we had, I think it must have been my third year, we had an open book exam where they give you the paper a week before, and then you come into the exam and write it for 3 hours. And I was notorious for leaving things to the last minute, always. And I remember coming into the library about that morning, the exam was in the afternoon, and I remember coming into the library and everybody from the course was in the library, going through books, reading what they could, talking about how they were going to answer this question. And I remember standing in the library and listening to them all and saying, I don't think you've answered the question right. And they'd all misread what the question was asking them to answer.
Yeah.
And I sat down and I said, this is how I think you should answer the question. And many of them just said, do you know what? It's too late now for us. And I went into that exam and I absolutely topped that exam, and everybody else came out 2 grades lower than me. So that was at a time when I realized that I'm very good at absorbing information and understanding information and simplifying it, but I'm also good at answering the question, knowing what the question is that's being asked.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I am able to, I think, retain most bits of information, regardless of whether or not they're technical. As long as I can understand it and put it into my own simple language, then I can explain it in a very simple language too.
Yeah, fantastic. So we'll move on to CCUS now. So CCUS, a research project, University of Sheffield. How did you take that from, or how did you get involved in that? And then how did you take that from a research project to a commercial business?
Yeah, it's quite a fascinating story, actually. So CCU International has only been around for a couple of years as a commercial entity. I didn't know any of the team at the University of Sheffield. We had, myself and I have another co-founder, we had launched a biotechnical business, which was focused on taking food waste and then recycling that food waste, putting it through a process to produce something called microalgae, which is just spirulinas and things. And then also utilizing some of that to grow crops. Now, this particular technology and project has been going for many years in Abu Dhabi very successfully. It was brought to France a few years back and it's been going really well there. We tried to bring it to the UK and we were faced with all sorts of legislation around what you could do with food waste. But also we needed to set up research facilities to do 2 years of research just to do things like animal feed.
Okay.
And we just thought the commercialization journey here is years and years and years away. So getting investment to support that R&D phase for the next God knows how many years was actually quite unrealistic. So I ended up going out to Silicon Valley to look for investment a few months into this business.
Okay.
And talking to investors, one of the processes, one of the technologies in the actual business produces quite a lot of CO2. Carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
So we wanted to, because we were all about circularity, we wanted to find a way to capture the carbon dioxide and ideally do something useful with it, like put it into crops or materials or whatever that might be. And we started researching carbon capture technologies. And what we came to realize was that virtually all the carbon capture technologies that were out there that were at commercial scale or close to commercial scale were all oil and gas technologies that had all been funded or invested in by your large companies, your BPs of the world, your Shells of the world. And they were very energy intensive, very industrial. You couldn't apply them to small scale plants. You couldn't apply them to the steel or the paper mills.
Yeah.
And we just thought there has to be a solution that's out there. We continued researching. And the reason why we thought it was so important is because it was such a crucial element to what we were doing. There's no point in taking food waste and recycling it if you're emitting CO2.
Yeah.
So at some point we were having a conversation, I can't remember who with, and they said, have you spoken to Professor Peter Styring at the University of Sheffield? Now, of course, we had one conversation with him and we just realized, my God, why has nobody commercialized this technology? And the fact of the matter is that we have many technologies like that sat in our universities that are predominantly headed up by academics.
Who directed you to him?
I can't actually remember who it was. It could have potentially been an investor that we spoke to. Okay. Now, what we found, the reason why we pivoted to the carbon capture was because what he was working on was fantastic. But also, as we were talking to investors, almost every single investor for about 3 months would say, tell me about this carbon capture technology you've got in there.
Yeah.
And we just thought, they all want carbon capture. That's the now solution. The biotech stuff can wait.
So you didn't know anyone at University of Sheffield. How do you then, from an outsider, pick up that university project and run with it as a business? Did they just hand it over to you? Or?
No, not at all. No, God, I wish it was that easy. No, it was us building a relationship with the IP founders.
Yeah.
So we built a relationship. They could see that there was actually traction in what we were doing. They could see we were credible. And they would then approach the university and say, actually, we found a vehicle to move this into its commercialization stage. So we began conversations with the university. Most universities are open to the conversation because, I can't even remember what the percentage of technologies die at universities. They haven't got funding for them. They don't fund a lot of the patents, etc. anymore. So it's an expensive business to be in.
Yeah.
So actually it serves them for somebody to come along and say, we'll get investment in, we'll set up a business and, we'll commercialize this technology. And many of these academics don't have these skills because they've not done this before. Yeah. So the chances of success are much higher. So having had those conversations with the commercial team at the university, we struck up a deal, got access to the IP, and we were allowed to then spin out an official university spin out with the two IP co-founders, the academics at Sheffield.
Yeah.
To bring in with us.
And prior to you guys taking over, you mentioned with the bio company, trying to get investment would be tough because of the years and years of R&D. And that would have been the same with CC.
CCU is the same, yeah.
There's 14 years of pre-R&D work.
Yeah.
And again, does all of that work come handed over by the university? Was it all done by Sheffield University?
Yeah, pretty much. So with the university, it was a good 12 years of solid R&D. And we were, I think they just managed to get a prototype ready when we approached the university. So very early stages of commercialization, but not quite there. It isn't unusual for a lot of these technologies to be R&D projects for many, many years. And I think some academics would probably wish that they continued to be R&D because that's their expertise, right?
Yeah. And it's their baby, I'm guessing, as well.
Their baby, yeah. So getting investment in for an R&D project is tough because if you go at an early stage, if you're going to an investor and saying, I want X million dollars, but actually we're not going to be revenue generating for another 15 years because we need to do 5 years of R&D on this and 5 years of R&D on this, you're less likely.
It's a better places to spend their money.
Yeah. So actually it makes sense to have a lot of the R&D take place at the university where there's a lot of learning and there's a lot of shared learning as well. So PhD students will contribute. And then when it gets to a point where it's ready potentially for commercialization, then it's a little bit easier to get investment behind you. And of course, most investors want IP-rich technologies. It favors the investor if the patents or the technologies of, patents are there through the universities, but the technologies have gone through a thorough R&D program at an established university.
Yeah. And then carbon utilization, what is it and what's the value to a business looking for net zero?
Yeah, so it depends on the industry. Obviously, when we talk about the energy or the oil and gas industry, absolutely huge emitters. And we talk about CCUS. So you've got carbon capture, which is the CC, the U, which is the utilization, and then the S, which is the storage part. And often up here in the North Sea, you'll see a lot of people talk about CCS.
Yeah.
And traditionally, it has just been CCS. The U was actually put in, I think it was 2015, the U was put in by the utilization, those that focus on the utilization side. And actually, a lot of them tell me it was probably a big mistake to do that because it's got lost in the CCUS.
Okay.
It is quite different, but at the same time, it's not. So if you think about everything that we touch and feel, from your Coke can that you open, to the dyes that we use on our clothes, to construction material, everything utilizes CO2. It takes CO2. It's why we extract so much of it out of the ground, right? Fossil carbon goes into virtually everything we touch and feel. So what we should be doing really is asking the question, if you think about net zero as a premise, right? The whole purpose of net zero is to reduce down our carbon emissions, regardless of what actions we're doing or what business we're doing, is to reduce down our carbon emissions. The only way we can actually get to a point where we're no longer emitting CO2 is if we stop extracting it and stop using it.
Yeah.
But let's be realistic.
That's not realistic.
It's not realistic.
Yeah.
And this is where, when you get particularly generations of people that pitch themselves up against oil and gas companies, the fact of the matter is everything you touch and feel has carbon in it. So the only alternative to not use it is, I don't know, go and sit in a forest somewhere with no clothes on and eat berries. It's the reality of it. It goes into everything. So we need to start thinking about the circularity. Okay, well, if it goes into everything, is there a way of us capturing those emissions and then introducing them back into the cycle so we don't have to take more fossil carbon out of the ground? And that's what we say. The distinction is the word fossil.
Yeah.
It's not carbon, it's fossil. Fossil carbon. Fossil carbon is what we extract, and that is what is doing the damage. If we can reduce down our need for fossil carbon, then that means we can get closer to our achievement of not emitting as much CO2. So the CO2 that we capture would normally end up where? Into the atmosphere, causing climate change. So utilization is all about capturing the emissions from those industries that are what we call hard to abate. So they're very difficult to do anything with because they can't stop burning fossil fuels. There's no easy solution to electrification or solar or whatever. So your steel mills, your steel plants, for example, your waste to energy plants. These industries, if we can take the carbon out of these industries and prevent them from emitting it into the atmosphere, and then we take that carbon and we utilize it back into construction material, into fuels, aviation fuels, for example, but also all these weird and wonderful things. Like we've just done a project with Unilever and Procter & Gamble and these guys to take the CO2 from the paper mills in the UK, which we've done, and we've converted it with BASF, who are the chemical manufacturers, converted it into ethanol, which will eventually get converted into what we call chemical surfactants. And that's the stuff that goes into virtually every cleaning product, your shampoos, your shower gels, your dishwasher tablets. It's the main ingredient that separates grease from water.
How much does it cost to do something like that? That doesn't sound like a cheap project.
It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they never are to start with, right? Now, the economics currently on the scale that we're doing it doesn't make sense. And it won't at this stage. You know, we've got a whole supply chain that doesn't exist.
So where does it need to be?
It needs to be lower than the cost of capture and storage.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, from a storage perspective, we're talking about taking carbon from these industries like refineries, etc., and then sending it down a pipeline and putting it into where we originally took fossil carbon out of, because we've got stores there and there's a potential for it to stay there.
Yeah.
Now, I am not anti-storage. I believe that we've got such a vast amount of CO2 in our atmosphere. At some point, we will have to do something other than just utilization isn't going to work. It's an and solution as opposed to an or solution. But the point is that carbon capture and storage is a pure cost exercise currently. And you've seen the announcements that have been made by government funding a lot of these projects. And that's the point. They need funded.
Yeah.
Whereas utilization could be a potential revenue generating opportunity.
So recycle, yeah.
Yeah. Now, if you think about companies like, you might think, okay, well, how does that play into companies like Unilever or Procter & Gamble and all these guys? How does it help them get to net zero? Well, you think about it, they haven't got an alternative to fossil carbon for their products.
Yeah.
So the only way that they can look at achieving net zero if they rely more on captured carbon, recycled carbon, and rely less on fossil carbon. And gradually, when you look at their models to get to net zero, that's what happens. They're relying more and more on captured carbon and less on fossil carbon until they find a solution to replace fossil carbon. Otherwise, net zero is just a pipe dream for them.
Well, maybe it's a pipe dream anyway.
Possibly.
But what's the biggest misconception people have then about carbon capture technology?
So it's just that when we say, I mean, you've used the term carbon capture technology, and one of the things we don't do in the industry is we don't separate the CC from the U and the S.
Okay.
So carbon capture is a technology. It's not a CCUS solution. So quite often you'll hear CCS or CCUS put together.
Yep.
And that's the problem. The cost exercise is the capture. And then you've got the utilization, which potentially could generate revenue streams. But then the storage exercise is also the cost exercise. So the misconception that a lot of people have is, and I guess maybe here I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate, right? It could be argued that if the oil and gas industry can justify storing large quantities of carbon in underground reservoirs, then they can justify more production.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, it's a waste mentality, right? You take fossil carbon out the ground, you use it, you throw it away. Landfill, which some people say is just another, storage is just another word for landfill. So you can see the premise behind the thinking behind that is if it's a cost exercise and we're having to pump loads of taxpayers' money in to subsidize it, when does it actually become profitable? Yeah. And the answer is possibly never. Yeah. So why would we do it? Why would we not focus on other solutions like utilizing CO2? Storage can also be put into construction material, which is a form of storage. Yeah. Why are we not doing that? That saves us from sending it down pipelines and all the monitoring that comes with it for God knows thousands of years.
Yeah.
So there is a justification from certain groups of people to say, well, it's a cost exercise, taxpayers are having to pay for it. Actually, how much of a dent is it making if all you're doing really is justifying the existence of continuing fossil carbon?
Yeah.
So that's the argument for it. And when you pair the lot together, it paints us in a really bad picture. And also, remember when I said when we first started looking at technologies, a lot of these technologies were backed by oil and gas companies.
Yeah.
That is still the case. So they are seen as oil and gas technologies. We are not,
Yeah.
but we are tarnished with that same, you're an oil and gas technology that's energy intensive, that's industrial, that pumps out hazardous chemicals. And it's my job, a huge part of my job is to educate people on why we are different from what has already been gone.
Wow.
Yeah, it's quite something, isn't it?
It's a lot.
Yeah.
So with CCU International, you guys have won lots of awards. You picked up projects fairly quickly. How did you achieve that, and what does that mean to the business?
Yeah, so it's been, look, this space is really tough. Anybody out there, and whoever else you speak to that's in this space will tell you that clean tech, climate tech, environmental technologies is a really tough space. And mostly because it's an unknown, because we haven't had this challenge before, right? You can't go to investors and say, look at all the trends that have been and gone and look at all the companies that have exited in this space. So it's really tough, but it's also very capital intensive.
Yeah.
So we're not asking for tens of thousands of pounds for seed money. We're asking for tens of billions of pounds for seed.
Yeah.
And a lot of businesses have failed because their focus has been on getting that investment in to start doing some of those large capital intensive projects. And even the pilots are capital intensive, right? So I think for us, we pivoted quite quickly. I mean, we're still raising and we have been for some time, but we very quickly realized that actually where we're going to get most of our credibility and our traction is if we start taking on projects and actually speaking to customers and clients. And again, a lot of startups in this space, they don't start speaking to customers and clients until they're ready for it.
Yeah.
We wanted to make sure we knew what we were going into. And we've pivoted. We pivot almost every day, depending on a conversation we have with somebody in whichever industry it is.
That's small business, and that's how you grow.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we've been able to kind of say, okay, we've spoken to X client and A and B client, and B client would take on our solution now if we could tick these 3 boxes, or if we could tick 3 out of 5 boxes. Okay, why don't we focus on ticking the 3 boxes and then we've got a project? Whereas we could spend all of our time and energy and resource speaking to investors, traveling and visiting investors and pitching to investors, and that could get us nowhere.
Yeah.
And this is why a lot of these technologies die. They fall off a cliff or into the valley of death, so we say. So they get so far, years and years of R&D, they get to a point where they're ready for commercialization, and then they're asking for tens of millions of pounds for investment to get the first couple of projects off the line, and they can't get investment and they die.
Yeah, and there'll be different reasons for that also. Maybe the fact that it's the really technical people who understand and develop it, they can't sell it, and they maybe can't propose it to get investment. But you guys went out originally looking for £3 million seed money, and then changed that to $9-10 million. What was the
pivot?
What happened there?
Do you know what it was? Yeah, it was the difference between the UK and everywhere else.
Okay.
So when we first launched the business, we went out to raise 3 million, and we thought that was quite ambitious.
Yeah.
But
first seed round.
First seed round, yeah. And we weren't, we haven't completed a lot of the stuff that we'd done. This was 2 years ago. We went out there, and sad to say, but we almost got laughed out the door by a lot of investors in Scotland.
But you can see why.
Yeah, 100%.
That's not the norm.
Yeah, it's not the norm. Yeah. So, there's us in cloud cuckoo land thinking, what do you mean you're not going to give us 3 million? And so quite often, you'd kind of get, well, you're not going to get that, seed round. You'd be lucky if you get tens of thousands or, maybe even 150,000. And we just thought, this is ridiculous. We can't do anything with 150,000.
Yeah, there's no point in starting.
No. And somebody said, have you tried going to the US? So we had a couple of meetings with investors in the US, and we upped it. So we went to 6 mil.
Okay.
And they laughed us out the door, but not because it was too much.
Just what can you do with 6 million?
It was too little.
Yeah.
And they said, you're doing nothing with 6 mil. You know, your competitors have just raised 300 mil. Your other competitors just raised 30 mil, you know, and they're still relatively, you know, close to where you are in terms of development. So, so we raised that amount. And actually over the years, we have had, again, I could probably write a book on the investor landscape globally and the difference between here and the UAE and Asia and the US, the mindset. But we generally came across a lot of resistance because either we were too early stage,
okay,
but then most companies in our space are, because no one's doing...
It's new technology, new industry,
Yeah, no one's doing big commercial projects. Or they didn't have the knowledge to back the technology. So we went into due diligence, for example, with one investor, and after a couple of months, they came back and said, we can't actually do the technical due diligence, so we can't lead on this.
Okay.
And so a big part of what we've been doing has been the education piece. And then if you go to an investor who has already, so a lot of the oil and gas industry already have their fingers in carbon capture technology pies. If you go to them, it's, well, we're already invested in competitor technology. So yeah, it's a real challenge, but I also think that over the last couple of years, we've focused on projects. We've focused on, right, where can we get our technology out that allows us to demonstrate what it can do? Yes, and then be able to scale it. And of course, very early on, we won this project with Unilever. We've got some really big ones coming up that are quite unique. They've never been done before. And we've got one going live in Aberdeen. I can't say too much about it just yet, but it's going live in a couple of months in Aberdeen. And that would be a bit of a game changer in the space. But it's also with industries who typically have been ignored from a carbon capture perspective. If you think carbon capture, you know, a large portion of our emissions comes from smaller industry.
Yeah.
Your steel mills, your waste to energy plants, your paper mills, your wastewater treatment plants, for example. And they've largely been ignored because they don't have the space, the resources, the energy requirement to put big carbon capture technologies. And then the question is, what do you do with the CO2 once you've captured it?
Yeah.
Because nobody's been storing any vast quantities of CO2 at all.
Yeah.
You know, globally, the amount that we've stored is very limited in comparison to how many years and how much money has gone into it. So why would an industry like the waste to energy plants say, yeah, we're going to capture all of our CO2. It's going to cost us 65% of the energy that we would normally generate to sell so that back to the grid. But we're going to use that 65% energy. We're going to capture CO2 at our cost. And then we're going to put it into, I don't know, a storage site, or we're just going to do very, very famously what Greta Thunberg, when she went to Drax power plant, you know, well, it's great. You've been making a song and dance about capturing, but you're just putting it back into the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to be tarnished with that brush. So it is a challenge. So we have to find solutions for our clients to do something with the CO2. And that is where our focus on the utilization. If we can't do the storage today, what can we do with the CO2 to create value, potential revenue, and store it permanently?
And when we've done these podcasts, we've sort of do different people who've taken investment from either they've been purchased by another company, they've taken private investment, they've taken private equity money. For you guys, what was your model? What were you going out there and proposing, and what kind of people were you looking for? Was it private equity? Was it private investors? Was it tech companies? And how did you end up going from the UK and realizing you're not going to get 3 million here and heading to the US?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think most tech founders, regardless of what type of tech it is, have there's this whole thing about being a unicorn. And there is pressure in the industry to be that next unicorn.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things we lack here in Scotland is ambition.
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing. And I think that shows when you speak to investors, you can see that they're obviously used to founders.
Some brilliant entrepreneurs in Scotland.
Fantastic. Yeah. But we are, it's almost like, get back in your box.
Yeah.
You know, who do you think you are? You can't do that. Do you know where you are?
Yeah.
And so I think that has really stunned ambition.
Okay.
Particularly in the tech space. And usually when you go out there, there's this big sort of dream of, you get, you know, venture capital investment, and it's a big name, and they make you go global within a couple of years, and before you know it, you're exiting at billions or whatever that might be. So there is that kind of dream in there that lots of people have. But actually, in the steps that we're taking with our business, we're not showing that that's possible.
Yeah.
So if I go out and say I want to achieve 1 billion in revenue over the next 10 years or whatever that might be, I need to show that I'm taking those steps to get there. And that's what investors need to be able to see.
Yeah.
The potential for me to do that is huge. The potential actually to do 10 times that is there.
And you mentioned that in the past. I think you put a press release out very early on when you kicked off.
Yeah, got a lot of criticism for that.
You were going to turn over $1 billion in 10 years. So what's the reality? You're 2.5 years down the line since you released that press release.
The reality for us is that I'm currently sat, we've started our commercialization journey. We now need to scale. This is the thing with our technology. It now needs to scale. It's great doing it at this size. We've done it at that size. It was great doing it a bit bigger. But now actually what investors want to know and what emitters want to know is, great, you can do 1 ton, you can do 10 ton, but can you do millions of tons of capture a year?
Yeah.
And I quite often ask, well, show me who's doing millions of tons of capture a year. Nobody is.
Yeah.
But they want to be able to see that. So the outlook is based on the emissions that we have. So there's an opportunity in the market for the amount of emissions that's out there, given the number of technologies that are out there that are actually able to do it. We are quite unique because of the type of technology that we are. We're very small. We don't use any hazardous substances. We can fit into some of those industries that have been ignored by carbon capture technology. So our market is actually a lot bigger. Our opportunity is a lot bigger. We're not focused on big oil and gas right now, because why do we want to run before we can even walk? But we can learn how to walk with some of these SMEs, these smaller companies. As far as the journey in terms of where we are, currently, right now, and this is what I think is crazy when I say I'm struggling to raise investment for this business, we focused on projects. We've got revenue through the door. We've got projects coming up. I have currently got nearly 1.5 billion in my opportunity sales pipeline just in the UK alone.
Wow.
And I can't get funded.
So you can't get funded from where?
Investment.
Anywhere?
No. It's the
So can you kick these projects off?
We're kicking these projects off, yeah. So we're getting some small project funding.
Do you get grant funding?
We haven't actually gone for any grants. So there was one for the project that we recently did with Unilever that was partially grant funded. But we had to front up our own money to finish that project off. So there is grant funding available. I would say a lot of the grant funding is available for early stage, pre-seed. We're not quite seed. We're in between seed and Series A.
Yeah.
Because we've managed to achieve in 2.5 years, take out the R&D, but we've managed to achieve in 2.5 years what most of our competitors still haven't done in 15, 16, 17, 18 years.
Wow.
And some of them actually...
What's that down to?
That's down... Well, I would say that's down to a lot of these technologies being backed by the oil and gas industry, but not being ready to do anything with the CO2. So no access to storage, for example. Why would you scale a technology and spend hundreds of millions of pounds on it if you can't do anything with the CO2? It's a cost exercise. So I think a lot of these technology have...
So some of this stuff a tick box.
Yeah, but also they've been held back because of the lack of storage. Obviously now it's starting to, there are things happening in government, but because of the lack of final investment decisions on these projects, on the storage, the technologies have been held back.
Yeah.
That hasn't held us back because we have the unique ability to not just capture the CO2, but we can refine it to any grade.
Yeah.
And we don't use hazardous substances. So we can put it back into the food and beverage industry for your beers and your Coca-Colas. If you use hazardous chemicals, nobody will touch it.
Yeah.
We can practically do anything with it. So it just opens up a whole variety of options for us. And that's what industries want to see, not just capture, but they want to see you can do different things with it.
Yeah. And you said refine it to any grade. What do you mean?
Yeah, so we've got different grades of CO2. So almost purity levels. So the highest level you will have like a research, like a medical grade type thing, which will be used in the research or labs, etc.
Okay.
And then you've got food grade, which is when you open your Coca-Cola can, you'll get the fizz. And I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago we had a beer shortage. That's food grade CO2. Yeah. It goes into like your salad bags to keep your salad. Salad. Otherwise, everything. Yeah, we wouldn't get fresh food here if that was the case. But everything that preserves food and drink is food grade CO2. It's very.
It's all different.
So well, anything for food and drink is what we call food grade. So it's very high grade. It's odorless. You can't see it. And then you've got other types of CO2 that can be used for like vaccinations, so kept at certain temperatures.
Okay.
But then gradually, depending on what you're using it for, the grade can go down. So construction material, it goes into like
steel?
aggregates. Not necessarily steel. It can go into concrete.
Okay.
It can go into aggregates. It can be used to cure bricks very quickly, for example. So you inject the CO2 whilst the bricks are curing. It absorbs the CO2 and it cures it quicker, and it can also make it stronger.
Yeah.
So it's used in a lot of aggregates and things, and that is a much, much lower grade. But the point is that everything that we produce is a food grade. It's a food grade and above. So if the construction industry needs CO2, they will buy the food grade in, and then they would dilute it down. There's obviously been energy and emissions involved in getting it to that food grade. Yeah. So we've opened it up to the industry to say, well, if you want 50% grade, we can give you 50% grade. You don't have to buy it in as food grade. And then if you look at companies like your soft drinks, your Coca-Colas, Pepsis of the world, Iron Brew, they will be buying food grade CO2 in its liquefied form.
Yeah.
So it's in its liquid form. They'll buy it in. Imagine the footprint involved in that. And by the way, most of it comes from Europe because our fertilizer plants mostly have shut down in the UK. So that's where our food grade CO2 comes from. So they would have bought it in, then they turn it back into its gas form to use in the carbonated drinks process. And the other end of the factory, they'll be putting it out of some chimney.
Yeah.
So what we want to be able to do is be able to capture it in an ideal world, utilize it back into the industry in its own space, so we don't need to, because transporting it is emissions, liquefying it is emissions, moving it around, turning it back to gas. Huge cost as well. Yeah.
Wow. And then because this is quite a new industry and new technology, how difficult is it then to attract people? Is there a skills gap? And also in this industry, we see huge diversity issues as something that the industry is pushing to change. But I'm guessing a new technology industry, that probably even worse.
Yeah, I mean, tech. Yeah, when you put together energy and tech, there is a large number of people wanting to move into this kind of space because it's, there's more purpose behind it, particularly young people. We're seeing more and more young people. I get approached all the time.
Yeah.
If you got, I'll do work experience or whatever that might be. There is a skills gap, and we recognize that. In order for us to get to a point where we have this, regardless of what you call it, net zero, energy transition, whatever that might be, we don't have the people to do it. It's a fact. Yeah. And this is why a lot of particularly the large players, are putting lots of resource and effort into making sure, there are programs that happen with schools to encourage, particularly girls to come into the industry, but there's also programs happening at university level and beyond, retaining people.
Yeah.
The challenge that we've got, we see, when I put something out there, as in a potential opportunity, what comes back at me is not very diverse. It is typically from the oil and gas industry, right? Because carbon capture has been seen as a typical, hydrogen has been seen as so it's not unusual. The problem that we've got with that is that we need, for this industry, given that it's a challenge we've not had before, and it's not the oil and gas industry, it's quite different. We need a different way of thinking. We need a diverse approach. We need innovation. And that isn't going to come from, majority of the time, from somebody who has been doing something a certain way for the last 25, 30 years. It's very difficult for me to look at those coming from the oil and gas industry and see, depending on what they've been working on, whether or not they can be innovative, whether they or not they can be diverse in their thinking. And that's what we need. It's not the same approach that we've had. Now, that's not saying that there isn't an opportunity for the transfer, but absolutely massive opportunity for the transfer of those skills.
Yeah.
But we've also got those little gaps that are sitting there that actually might be a good opportunity to look at and say, can we get more diverse people in from diverse backgrounds to give us that diversity of thought?
Yeah. Wow. And then you mentioned innovation. So how do you kind of foster that culture of innovation and resilience within a startup?
Yeah, it's
because it must be frustrating, like you mentioned, not being able to get the funding. And
it is. But you know what? I think one of the advantages that startups have, because we don't have investors, pushing our buttons and leading us down a certain way, we have the freedom as founders. We have the freedom to make decisions.
Yeah.
And we also have the freedom to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And we also have the ability to correct them very quickly. So a prime example I'll give you is, and I didn't realize this until my husband actually said it to me. He works for one of the big majors, And he came in one day and I was on a call with my co-founder and something didn't work the day before. So I was speaking to my co-founder and he sat down and listened to this conversation. And I said to my co-founder, I said, well, so we try something different tomorrow. Okay, how do we do this? And within 5 minutes, we'd sorted out that we were going to try something completely different the next day and see if that worked. And he was in absolute awe. He said to me, I've just been working on something that's taken me 6 months to pull together, another 6 months to convince the senior leadership team to buy into it, and then another 6 months potentially to roll it out, only for somebody to come along and say, hold on a second, I didn't approve that. And he said, and we're talking about being agile here. And he said, this is why I love what you do, because when I compare, the corporate environment and we talk about being agile, thinking more like a startup, actually, we're far from it. We don't have the ability to. And so that is where I think the innovation and the resilience behind it comes. And you make it okay for your people to make mistakes. Because for me, making a mistake, there's learning in that. At least you can come away from that and say, do you know what? I now know what not to do next time. And you're more likely to be successful.
100%. And then using your psychology background, how important is that being as a leader of a company that's all over the world? You're obviously focused everywhere, not just in the UK, not in London, not in Aberdeen, but everywhere. How has that background in psychology helped you?
I think it's helped me in virtually everything. I think it's given me the ability to see things quite uniquely and quite differently from most people. I spent a lot of my time in the oil and gas industry in my early days when I was posted out to Nigeria, and I did 3 years in Norway with Statoil, now Equinor, building these behavioral change programs. And it was all about motivation. It was all about leadership. So I would be training from CEO, MD to senior leader, right way down to riggers, scaffolders, you name it. But it was teaching them that you didn't need to be in a leadership position to be a leader in this space. And
Everyone.
I think everyone, you don't need to have that qualification or that level or that title. And actually we're all, particularly in the space of safety, we're all setting an example, regardless of whether it's your manager or your peer. And in teaching that in the industry, I think it taught me that actually anyone can do this. There's nothing stopping you from being that person that can motivate somebody, that can lead somebody, that can support somebody, that can guide somebody. And actually, then you just apply that to business. Because business is what? It's people. I used to say, I remember my first business, it drove me absolutely nuts. So my first business was set up in COVID. And I've stepped away from it, but we got investment in during COVID. High net worth individuals was set up. It was an insulation company that was focused on insulating granite and sandstone buildings, some research at RGU. And I used to think to myself that, that there was a certain type of person that could do this. And I was told by many around me, well, you don't have the experience and you haven't done this and you haven't done that. But I remember succinctly thinking about 3 or 4 months in, and I had a team of about 6 people. And I remember thinking, my God, I probably spend 70 to 80% of my time focused on the people. Whether it's supporting them or managing them, but also sometimes if they're not performing, then the effort that needs to go into that and what you do with the business. And I thought, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up for the people element. And then after that particular business, I came to realize that actually it is all about people. And if you're not comfortable with people, you shouldn't be in that position.
No, and you lose a lot of your time dealing with people instead of dealing on the things that you think when you go into it. You think, obviously, you've got to sell, you've got to get new clients, you've got to do the admin, you've got to manage it. But you spend a lot of the time dealing with the people, and then you're still got to do that or bring more people in to do that with, then gives you more people to deal with.
But you know what? We also spend less time focused on building those skills. Despite how much time we spend on people, we spend less time.
I think there are more skills that you just learn as you go. The more things you have to deal with different members of staff, then you learn from that. So you're always learning. It's not an education. It's just an ongoing thing.
I mean, if I had £1 for every day that I said, my God, I've not come across this one before.
They just continue.
In Del Boy's words, I'd be a millionaire.
And then away from CCU International, you've also got involved in Women in New Energy and Internet and Zero.
Internet Zero,
Internet Zero, yeah. So how did that come about, and what drove those?
Yeah, really proud of that actually, and what we've managed to achieve. So Internet Zero is still in its infancy, and to a certain degree, Women in New Energy is as well. But Internet Zero basically stemmed from, I was working quite closely with Shell a couple of years ago, and I was actually pitching at 70,000 people at this tech summit in Lisbon, and I was pitching with Shell. It was, what was it called? Web Summit, I think it was called, in Lisbon. Yeah, it's a couple of years ago, and so year before last. And I was with Shell, and I was pitching. And over the 3 days of pitching, there were no women.
Wow.
And I actually ended up winning the pitch. But I went to Shell and I just said, what's going on?
Yeah.
This is not good enough. And they'd already recognised that this was a problem, right? And they were trying to find ways to try and support more women into, not just women, but people from more diverse backgrounds. And we ended up having a conversation and did a bit of research into where the gaps were. And we came to realise that, we do quite a lot of work with kids at school. We do quite a lot of work university level to get more diverse people into the industry. We're not very good at retaining them, which is a whole other issue. But actually, it's the sort of the 16 to 18-year-olds that are falling off the radar. They never consider energy or the energy transition space as an option. It's never put in front of them unless you live in Aberdeen or you've got a parent in the industry. And I recall my journey, I didn't choose energy.
Yeah. Kind of fell into it.
Yeah, if somebody said it to me, I would have been like, why do I want to go join the gas board or the electricity company? So I think it was really important to Shell as well, that there was some support behind actually looking at what is it that we're missing? Why are we not attracting these people?
Yeah.
And the main thing really, the conclusion that we came to after quite a bit of research was that these young people need role models. They need to see faces. I mean, if I think about me growing up in the industry, when I joined the industry, there was nobody that looked like me.
Yeah.
I was shipped out to Nigeria, me and 6,000 men, and nobody looked like me.
Yeah.
So it's important, I think, that if you've got people that look like you in the industry that have been there, done that, despite the odds, there's a possibility that they might actually believe it's an option for them. Yeah. And that is where I think a lot of those people from diverse backgrounds, they lack those role models. So the three of us came together, my co-founder, who heads up social impact investment for Shell, who have predominantly supported the scale to where we are now. And now we're going out to donors. We've got investment, et cetera, coming in from different organizations, different companies to support the start of this. We've just recruited our CEO. She's phenomenal. And the other co-founder is, he actually has his own energy company.
What's the CEO's background?
Jenny Hewitt. So Dr. Jenny Hewitt, she comes from predominantly an academic background, but she's done quite a lot of work with young people. Okay. So very good at engaging young people, but also with diverse groups of people. So she's still got very strong ties to university, but she is not been in the energy industry before, which is, I think, quite a good thing.
Well, she's got that support anyway, so it brings something else.
Yeah, but she's very good at, when it comes to engaging young people and knowing what needs doing to engage them.
What the triggers are.
Yeah. So that was Internet Zero. So we've literally just recruited our CEO. So we're going live with that. We're going in a big way. We had fantastic support from the Scottish Labour Party leader last year when we launched the event. And also we have got some major players coming in. I can't name them just yet, but we will have some really good support in the industry. And then Women in New Energy was a unique one actually, because I got very frustrated a few years ago at being the only female and the only person of colour on many a panel, mostly here in the UK. Yeah. Ironically, in some parts of the world that you would expect it to be less diverse, like Saudi or the UAE, are actually more diverse on panels, which is bizarre. But I got very frustrated. I was at an event, a conference a couple of years ago, and I came off stage. And every time I come off stage, I always get mostly young people, females, people from diverse backgrounds saying, oh, it's really nice to see a female talking on a technical subject. Yeah. And I actually approached Energy Voice at the time and I said, there must be something we can do. There's obviously a desire to do this. Yeah. And then I partnered with Annabelle, Annabelle Tal at Think PR, who did a lot of her team did all the branding behind it. Okay. And we built it from nothing, really. It was a case of, I don't know if anyone's going to like this. Yeah. And before you knew it, tickets were sold out. and we've moved to a bigger venue.
Yeah.
And it's grown all sorts of arms and legs. So we very quickly realized it had to be commercial in order for it to get traction, because when we spoke to other organizations, they were telling me, we're grassroots. Oh yeah, we wanted to do that, but we haven't got the time because we've all got full-time jobs. And I said to Annabelle, there's no point in doing this for the next 20 years and not really getting anywhere with it.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that there's a commercial element to this. So we brought in
I think that's
support.
More UK based, or definitely more Aberdeen based than it is globally. We've done stuff in Africa, and there's a load of very senior females within the African market. And we did have Miss Thakral from Worley at the time who spoke on, she was of Indian background, and she spoke on our, I think it was our ADIPEC breakfast or our OTC breakfast.
Yeah.
But we've definitely seen, doing this podcast, less senior females within the industry here, for sure.
I'm not surprised at that. And, I wish it were different.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that drives me, really. I want people to look at what I'm doing, despite, coming from a difficult upbringing, but also, the background that I come from, the fact that I'm not technical. I don't come from an engineering discipline. I want people to go, well, if she can do it, then why can't I? And it has inspired people to look at the industry. It has inspired, and, certainly Annabelle's focus has been on the younger generation, inspiring the younger generation. And I think the mix of those two, with the two of us involved, I think we are quite good role models for people to look at and say, I could do this too. Maybe I should explore. And that's the whole intention of what we're trying to do. We're not trying to, we know we're not going to change the world overnight, right? Behavioral psychology, right? The cultural change programs which I used to run in some parts of the world were not an overnight or a year or a 2-year fix. They were decades of work.
Yeah.
You would start to see the results of these maybe 10 or 15 or 20 decades along, only because it was all about conforming. So if you got enough people to do it a certain way, then anybody that joined the industry would just conform because they didn't want to be seen as different. So if rules were set a certain way, you walk into a building, everyone's holding the handrails, they're walking up, you're the only one that's not. It's going to get to a point where you're going to start holding the handrail because you don't want to be seen as the only one that's not.
Yeah,
sure. And that's what we need to do in the industry, just make it the norm.
Yeah. And then looking ahead, what's the biggest opportunities for the clean tech and carbon capture industry?
So the opportunity, the great thing about carbon capture is, and technologies typically in this space, is there's a global application.
Yeah.
This isn't just a Scotland or an industry.
It's not regional, it's not an industry.
No. And it's every industry, right? And the reason why I say it's every industry, most people don't understand this. It's not just what you see that comes out of your chimneys, exhaust, or flue stacks, right? What you're burning, fossil fuel that you're burning. It is if you think of every single large organization in the world will have thousands in their supply chain.
Yeah.
Every single one of that individual company in their supply chain contributes to their emissions. And actually, when we talk about net zero was all about, in order for us to get to net zero, this is the scientific definition of net zero, because I recognize that 99.9% of the people that I speak to don't know what net zero, businesses don't know, can't define net zero to me. So the meaning of...
How would you define it?
In its very simplest form, the meaning of net zero, when we look at this, what we call the science-based targets, so in science, in order to get to net zero, if you are emitting in your business 100 tons of CO2 a year, in order for you to get to net zero, you need to be emitting or eliminating or reducing 90% of that.
Yeah.
So by the time you get to net, or whenever the date is for net zero, you can only be emitting 10% of that. Any more than that, you can't define yourself as having achieved net zero.
Wow.
So if you imagine all of our emissions, and I'm not just talking about the stuff that you burn or the petrol that you put in your car, I'm talking about when you go off and order pens or pencils, stationery, where does that come from?
Flying to OTC or flying the ADIPEC or whatever.
Yes. But also if you're buying stuff and you're selling stuff, so the emissions involved are, where was it mined? Where was it manufactured? How many emissions was involved in manufacturing? How many emissions involved in getting it to you? And then when you put it into landfill, there are emissions there as well.
Yeah.
Now, that can be more than 90% of a company's emissions. Sits in the scope 3.
Yeah.
Or in their supply chain, or what they might call tier 3, tier 4, tier 5, whatever you call it. And all of those are beyond your control. You can't control what they do.
Yeah.
So now tell me that net zero is possible.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's not, but you can see the challenge that we've got.
Yeah.
And so how do you eliminate 90% of your emissions if 90% of that you've got zero visibility of and zero control over?
Yeah. So I guess a positive is that we have especially here in the UK, we have a roadmap. However, in some countries don't even have a roadmap.
Yeah.
But putting a date on that roadmap is maybe where it gets
It's in law now.
lost.
We have to do it.
Yeah.
So, and there will be penalties if we don't. So I don't think it was thought about very well.
No.
I think it's, again, this is, academics are great, scientists are great, but how does that translate to business?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when we're in business to generate revenue and make money.
Yeah.
If we're being forced to do things that are just going to be a cost to us and we see no benefit from it. I'm not saying net zero, there's loads of benefits to net zero, your branding, your reputation and all the rest, particularly if you're consumer facing, then of course people have choice, right? But the point is that the cost that is applied, it's like carbon capture, there's a cost associated with it.
Yeah.
The cost has to be less than the benefit. And currently,
It's not.
they're not seeing the benefit. It's different if we've got, I don't know, a carbon tax, right? And the government says, right, for every ton of CO2 that you emit, we're going to charge you a tax of £1,000. And you think, well, it makes sense for me to do carbon capture because that's going to cost me £500 to do. But we don't have that. We don't have any of that in place.
There's no driver there.
We haven't moved quick enough for it.
Yeah. And then just going forward, as for anyone who's an entrepreneur or startup, what would be your words of advice or wisdom?
I have loads. I would say, particularly for startups, I think we're so fixated on this pipe dream of getting VC investment and becoming a unicorn. The reality is the stats becoming a unicorn is really, really, really low.
Yeah.
I would focus attention on getting business, speaking to your clients, your customers, really understanding what they want so that you can survive. That's the first thing. But also going out there and winning projects. And if the journey is slower than you had originally planned, then so be it.
And for new technology then, like you guys, how easy is it to win work there? Or to someone who's maybe developing a new product and try to take that to market, what would be your advice then on how would you win that work?
That's actually a lot harder.
Yeah.
One of the things that I have done, I think I've been quite unique at is, and a lot of people do say it to me, and now I see the benefits of it now, right? When I talk about what I've got in my pipeline, there's a reason why I've got what I've got in my pipeline. Now, if you think about it, we're really no different from any startup that's been around for 2.5, 3, maybe even some longer, right? Some shorter. We're really not that different.
Not a lot that's sitting with $1.5 billion in their pipeline.
Well, yes, but also that's not in the bank,
Yeah.
right? And we haven't got investment in the way that we had hoped. We've had a little bit of investment, but it surely isn't what we were thinking we were going to get. So a lot of startups are in our space. Why, in our, where we are now, why are we so different from a lot of the ones out there? And I tell you why, because we shout about it.
Yeah.
So I remember when I first put out this press release, and I mentioned to you, put this press release out a couple of years ago, I got huge amounts of criticism, mainly from the industry here, saying I was absolutely crazy.
For the number.
For the numbers, yeah. And I remember thinking, and I didn't want to do it, because if you look prior to that, I wasn't really on social media, like I wasn't on LinkedIn. And it was some advice we took on, and they said, look, when you're a startup, nobody knows who you are. Nobody knows CCU International. Nobody will, majority of the people in this world will never hear of
But they knew who you were after you put that numbers out.
They did.
Yeah.
In Aberdeen, they certainly did.
Yeah.
But also, a startup, the brand is not the company.
Yeah.
The brand is the entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And I was pushed into putting myself out there. I was pushed into putting myself and actually building my own brand, building my...
You've done a lot of speaking engagements and things like that.
And that builds your credibility. And then people go, oh, I've heard of CCU International.
Yeah.
And they haven't really, but they've heard of me.
Yeah.
So, and at some point, that will change, but
So
until that happens...
is the advice to get out there?
Get out there. Every single time I speak to a startup and I say, why haven't I heard of you? And this happens in Aberdeen as well. The phenomenal technologies we've got here. Nobody's heard of them. Why?
Yeah.
And you know why? Because they're nowhere to be seen. They're not out there pushing out, okay, they've gone and pitched, or they don't push it out on their social media. They don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And I say to them, why don't you talk about it?
Is that a fear?
Yeah. They say, well, I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
When are you going to be there?
Yeah. You're always pushing for excellence or pushing for perfection. You're never going to get there.
Exactly. If I pushed out, when I've got, I don't know, if we did that all the time, it wouldn't happen, right? That's why you get these companies that you suddenly go, oh, they've got $1 billion exit and nobody had ever heard of them.
Yeah.
Or these companies have gone under after 10 years of trying and nobody had ever heard of them.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? If you don't put yourself out there, so you have to be open to the criticism that comes too.
Yeah.
You get praise, but you also get a hell of a lot of criticism and a hell of a lot of get back in your box.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have to think, what am I doing this for? Am I doing it for those people, or am I doing it for my business and my own development? And
so get thick skin and just get on with it.
Oh my God, yeah, thick skin is the main thing, for sure. You need very thick skin.
Perfect. And then last question, since we're in a bar, what's your drink of choice?
I'm going to be a real pain because I don't drink.
It's okay.
So, and normally it's water. But if I had to really push the boat out, it would probably be a lemonade.
Perfect. Beena, thank you very much for taking part today.
Thank you.